Rob, thanks for coming on the show.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. So, being in a space where you're doing sales training, I want to kind of head off the first objection that I think a lot of our audience probably runs into with sales coaches, sales trainers, and authors like yourself, which is, is this going to work for me? Yes, this works for everybody else. We are special snowflakes, and a lot of the times for in our world, clients are selling branding or creative services and things that are more intangible. And there's a complex sales cycle, and there are a lot of stakeholders. So maybe we could start there, and I'm sure that that's something you've run into for years, and just what your response is to that sort of objection.
Well, it's a legitimate objection because I think one of the biggest mistakes made in sales training is we'll obsess on the training, but how are we doing on the implementation? So I don't really think it's our training that fails us. I mean, I could just redirect you to open probes, which we learned on day one. By the way, 98% of us don't really use the open probes we think we're using, but let's just stay with the premise of some of the most basic moves. You're never going to get worse doing them. You're not. The problem is, are you going to implement what you're learning? And so I think that's a casualty of sales training, and some of it falls on the sales trainers clearly, but some of it falls on that lack of follow through. And I don't expect the follow through to come from necessarily those who are teaching. I mean, it's got to come from the top down. So, and that means you have to have the stomach for it, because like learning a kick serve in tennis, you're not going to get the balls in quite as often as you used to, and then you're going to really improve. But you have to be able to stomach that dip while you're learning a new process. And a lot of times it's not the sales force, it's management that can't handle the dip.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've sort of found that my sales skills, it's sort of like a cup of water that has to be refilled all the time. It's like there's just ups and downs. And then when it does come time to sort of get back up to speed and learn new things, I often like to bounce around between different people and different thought processes, and and so on. So I guess for people, for our audience, where you have an owner that's juggling a million different things, and a lot of our audience also just doesn't identify as being in sales and doesn't take a lot of, pride in that sometimes. What is that? What does that training regimen look like? How do you fit it in with everything else that you have to stay up to speed on?
Wow, there's a lot to that question to
Yeah.
unpack. So let me just pack one part of it, and then you can just hammer away at me. But the part about sort of some people resisting the sales training and resisting even admitting that they're selling, and they don't like the word, and so the first thing in that type of training is we got to kind of demystify what selling is, and we have to remind people that it's actually one of the kindest things you could do for another human being. And I mean that. I mean, we look at sales as, and I was a life insurance salesman. So, we look at this Rob Jolles, New York Life guy coming in and shoving us into a policy. And that's a really good stereotype if some people want to cling to. That's fine. But the fact is, we help people over their fear of change. We help people to make proactive decisions, not reactive decisions. People can find religion and find solutions all the time when you realize that traditionally left to our own, device, we fix small problems, not big problems. So the first thing we have to do before we even get near a sales model, I don't care if it's a grizzled sales vet or just a person in human resources who wants to learn to persuade, we have to start defining the difference between manipulation and influence. We have to, which by the way is one word, and that's intent. What is the intent of the persuasion or influence that's going on? But when we don't do that and we go, hi, here's a new sales model for you, and it's a good one, we have a section of the audience that's always kind of locked into, I don't want to push people to do things they don't want to do. And the fact is, I do want to push people to do things they don't want to do, as long as it's in their best interest, ethical, and something that down the road they're really going to need. I have no problem helping you past your fear of change. That's why they pay me.
Right. And can you dig into that a little bit more? Because there's some people that would argue that manipulation is everything. It's whether it's for good or bad, or it's subtle, or it's aggressive. Everything is a form of manipulation. Me talking to you right now and asking you a question is a form of manipulation. So, where do you draw those boundaries?
Yeah, and I go back to that word again, intent. So I'll give you a quick story. I wrote customer-centered selling back in the '90s, and with Simon and Schuster, did real well. It's got I'll make you more money. It's that sales book. But the most recent sales book I wrote was a book called How to Change Minds, and I got the great Brian Tracy to actually write a quote on the front cover, a quote I had to have actually sheepishly go back and say, I can't use the first one because it was about, I'll help you make more money. Rob will do it. And it was a wonderful quote, but that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to help people realize, that there was this fear of change that we've got to get people over. So you ask about manipulation, and it's funny because there aren't two sales models around. There's one, okay? So when I say intent, when I opened up How to Change Minds, which is the only story the publisher took out, I had people, I said, hey, you're sitting on a bar stool and you're having a drink with a buddy who, as usual, has had too much to drink. And you ask for the car keys, and as usual, he says no, and you ask a couple more times, and the answer is no. And this time he never makes it home. He makes it to the hospital barely alive, but the two people on the road that he kills never make it home. Their family is destroyed. They'll never get over that horrible night situation, life change. Neither will you, of course, the person who committed this crime. But what about, again, you sitting on that bar stool? You had an opportunity to get the car keys. Okay, you couldn't do it. If I can show you a way to do that, am I manipulating you? Again, I'm not trying to help me here. I'm trying to help you. And Dan, let me just spiral one more thing here. I think one of the culprits, and remember, I'm at the bullseye here. I'm the guy who's teaching sales for 35 years. I think one of the things that I've had to sort of reevaluate in my own mind are sales contests. Because, and not all of them, but think about it. Dan, you would never push somebody into something they didn't want to do because you're a good guy, and so you're not manipulative. But what if you're 2 sales away from a cruise? What if you're 3 sales away from a bonus of $20,000, $30,000, and now you're sitting in front of a prospect? What's your move? They don't really need this, not now. What's your move? So you can see that I'm not going to budge from my line of it really does come down to intent, but I am going to tell you that line is a lot slipperier than people think, particularly with the way we incent and push our salespeople.
Yeah, and there's so much to dig into there that's really interesting. And maybe the first thing is incentive structures, because there's lots of different incentive structures, there's lots of new innovation in that role or that area. There's certain companies that will have a pool and everybody draws from the same pool. Then there's the classic just commission only, and then there's all sorts of things you can do. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And I know it's domain dependent, so it's not one way to do it across the board, but maybe just your thoughts on the evolution of incentive structures and what you see, for people that are doing this really well these days.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked the question because I have one favorite. I've been in I'm in every industry. I don't know if you noticed, I've done 12 of the sales seminars for NASA. I do hostage negotiators, polygraphic examiners, because I'm dealing with, helping people get over that change. But one of the favorite models I have, and Toyota's been a client of mine forever, maybe 20 years, in the car industry, not all of them, but some of the car manufacturers tie that incentive that you're talking about to the customer survey, the customer experience. Okay, meaning, okay, I'm gonna swing with a couple of nasty tactics, and I'm gonna get Dan's business because I want that cruise. But Dan will wake up. Dan is going to go, well, what did I do here? Down the road, that gives the sales a black eye, gives that company a black eye. But what if we took that bonus, that incentive, and we said, we're going to survey after all this is over. And if our client tells me that meeting with Dan and the purchase is over, was extraordinary and exceptional. And that's his feedback. That's what I want to incent you on. I don't want to incent. In other words, it's like golf. I think a lot of times we're looking for how far the ball went down the fairway. And I'm trying to measure the swing a little bit. We'll get distance. We'll get all that. See, if we have customers that evaluate that experience that way, our sales will grow. We will do fine. So, to answer your question, there's different models out there, but I love that particular model. So I think that's the fairest way to do it for the client.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's who we're looking out for.
Yeah, and I like the sound of it. I guess what I'd be skeptical of is incentives are bigger than just what you do internally, because there's market incentives, there's these macro incentives, and what if you can't get the best talent now because somebody else can make a bigger commission and make more money elsewhere, so now you're not getting the best salespeople. So that's what I wonder about is, does it need to be rethought on a bigger level, or is there something that kind of reward that incentivizes people on an individual level but also makes everybody row in the right direction? Because that's a meandering big question, I guess.
Well, I think it's actually very legitimate.
Yeah.
I think it's funny, and I happen to be one of them, which is a shocker to people. My number one incentive, particularly at Xerox, wasn't money. I really enjoy recognition. Which I don't know if this number still holds, but for a long time, there was a number floating around that said 85% of the reason why people terminated when they would go through their exit interviews it had to do with a lack of recognition. So a lot of times, I think it's sort of old school that people think we're obsessed with money. Yes, I want to take care of my family, but I also want to keep my life in balance. So there are many things that incent me. So to answer your question, it wasn't money for me, and I need enough, and I don't. Please don't be insulting. But I'd like to hear that I did a good job. I'd like to go to that next meeting that I don't normally get invited to. I have a list. If you'd like, I'll send it to you. You can send it out to your clients. I'll give you 20 ways to incent people that has nothing to do with money.
Right.
And in sales, I think everyone just stereotypes us as, we want all that money. You know what we want in sales? We want to be compensated for the work we do. So, because I happen to think we're actually all on commission. People. And then think about it, Dan. Why do people really not want to be in sales? I don't want to be on commission. Okay, I want a nice steady salary. Okay, well, you can have that. But I tell you what, you can exceed everyone's expectations. That's what you're going to get paid. And if you're me, I wake up in the morning and I'm kind of obsessed with exceeding my customers' expectations. I don't know. Call me old-fashioned. I wouldn't mind being compensated for it. So, because if I don't, by the way, they're going to put me on performance and correction, and in 3 months I'll be gone.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is that we're all taking on risk. If you're in a job, you're taking on risk. If you own the company, if you're in sales, but if you're in sales, you're much closer to it. You can see it; it's out in front of you, as opposed to accumulating somewhere where you can't see it, and then you get a pink slip due to forces outside of your control. So that's kind of what it looks like, which I think has pros and cons, but has a lot going for it. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I work with a lot of companies that go through mergers and acquisitions. Do you know the safest people in almost any company are the salespeople? Now, not all the salespeople, okay, but you'll be. And I'm not trying to sell everybody on being a salesperson here, but I will tell you that if you think about it, I don't care what kind of a merger has occurred. The top 20% of the sales force is the most secure in the company. Okay, I don't care which side of that fight.
And they're free agents. These are people that can bounce around easily, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, you were running your own business in a sense.
Yeah, and one thing we talked about in the past is the transferability of sales and salespeople, which I find kind of counterintuitive. So if you were the CMO of a consumer packaged goods company, it would be pretty hard or relatively hard for you to go become the CMO of a tech startup or something like that. But if you were an amazing salesperson in IT, you could probably bounce around easier between industries because sales is sales is sales in a lot of ways. Or let me know if you disagree. But
I 100% agree with you. And we are in the minority on this one. And I recently wrote a piece about this because one of my passions is I've been volunteering for about 9 years to help people in career transition. And so
yeah,
I'm working with staffing agencies, et cetera, tightly. And I can't tell you how many times until I decided I got to write this piece where I hear, well, a guy's got, really good candidate and I can see it sold a lot, but he hasn't sold buttons. Okay.
yeah,
It's like, okay,
yeah,
but I could lock a guy in a closet for 2 days. He'll know buttons,
right.
it takes a talent to be able to sell. And the buttons are the easy part. You know what I mean? But
Yeah,
most people
yeah.
miss that.
But why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that sales is transferable, but marketing is not and has a lot more complexity?
Because when you deal with persuasion or influence, selling, whichever word we want to use here, there really is a repeatable, predictable process. We know the decision cycle that clients go through. It's 6 stages, 3 decision points. It really hasn't changed all that much. A conversation's a conversation. We're doing it through Zoom, but a conversation's a conversation. So guys like Jolles can wander around through all these weird little companies and industries. I work with 50 financial institutions, but as I mentioned, I work with all kinds of kind of kooky companies. The process of persuasion really doesn't change. Even I do parent groups, the process of persuasion doesn't really change, but marketing, now, that's a little bit different. Just because I sold a Xerox copier doesn't mean I can come wandering in and say, well, and because I marketed a copier, I'm now going to market that chemistry kit, whatever it is. Now the argument is true, which is I think you're going to have to learn the button industry for this one. I think you're going to need to understand what we do because maybe you do. I don't know of a repeatable, predictable marketing process
Yeah, and yet
that
there's
fits all industries.
yeah, and yet there's so many people trying to sell something like that, trying to sell that process, and it's usually BS. Yeah.
I'm actually, and I rarely do this, for a guy who's, been on the road for almost 40 years, I don't like traveling a whole lot when I'm not the speaker. Okay.
Mhm.
But I've actually gone to a couple thinking, believe me, I'm looking for the golden egg. I'm looking for something because I see advertisements for it. So you can market something, a repeatable, predictable process that transfers over. Okay, I'll buy a ticket. I've been disappointed. I don't see it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of people, trying to do square peg round hole sort of stuff for a lot of different areas. I guess one question is, so we're kind of on the same page with that. There's a lot more complexity in marketing, and you need to understand an industry versus sales where it's about psychology and the human experience, and it's more transferable. I'm a kind of a loose student of spin selling and then the challenger sale, and sort of seeing these different milestones in the history of sales training. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like what has changed in the way that sales processes have happened based on bigger, macro changes? What do you think has changed in the last 30 or 50 years or whatever it might be?
Okay, and first of all, let's give a shout out because you just hit on the number one model that I do think revolutionized sales. Forget them all the others. It's spin selling. Absolutely changed the game. And that is a British scientist who actually created that model. Never
Neil
sold a
Rackham,
thing.
right?
Okay,
Yeah.
Neil Rackham, you got it.
Mhm.
Who I've had the pleasure of meeting a number of times.
Yeah.
A very interesting guy. Not a salesperson, a scientist. But
Mhm.
we needed a scientist. The reason why that changed, by the way, in 20 seconds is Rackham was the one who said, and I'm not taking a shot at any competition here. It's just a process that, I know you all seem to be cuddling up to needs-based selling and people buy based on needs and, find the need and, which is all relative and good. But the only problem is it couldn't be further from the truth. People don't do buy based on needs. It's a completely flawed model. It's been out there for decades and decades. And Rackham said, okay, you can keep doing that. But actually, I'll just show you that the problem shapes the need. It's really the problem that we're after. And when the problem gets big enough, we probably want to be talking about the problem and problem solve the problem. So when Rackham opened that door, that's when everybody else rushed in with their own kind of problem. Not everyone, by the way, but problem-based model. Okay, that's where I rushed in. I was actually a spin. It was called a D squared certified spin instructor. I not only taught it,
Sounds
I
like a
could
fitness
certify.
class.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I could get you in great shape. I not only taught it, I could certify you in it. I was intimate with spin. Okay, it changed me. So I don't think that the process has changed all that much. As long as it's question based. It's understanding open-ended questions. I'm hoping it's separating those problem-related questions from trust questions, meaning I can't walk in and go, hi, Dad, what problems are you having? So I do need to understand you before I earn the right to ask you about what isn't working on the podcast, okay? But that hasn't changed. I'll tell you the one thing I think that has changed, and that's freaking information. We got so much information now that it's sort of the Achilles heel to most of sales is that I think the biggest mistake salespeople make is they're dependent on all their product knowledge, and they're obsessed with the product knowledge part of this because it's so accessible that they forgot that again, that's the easy part. It's probably the most overrated part. Learning about your product is not sales training. Learning how to get somebody who want to hear about it and what to do after you explain it, that's the sales training, okay? But when we start putting in features and benefits, and call it sales training, that's where we're killing ourselves. But that's the only part. I think it's the information is much more accessible, but the bookends, don't think so.
Well, we run into this a lot, and so do our clients. And for us, we focus on marketing agencies, and we're doing lead generation, so we're sort of this weird intersection of sales and marketing. And I know with not certainty, but 90% certainty what somebody's situation is when I get on the call. And it's a marketing agency. They've gotten from 0 to 1 on referrals and personal networks. They might get a little organic traffic. They have an owner and maybe one other person doing sales as a hobby. So there's certain facts that are there. And then I feel like a lot of my process is sort of this kabuki dance of making them feel like I've listened to them and that I've dug a lot deeper than I need to.
But you're right. You're right. I have to say it. It's that at this point I have told you a bunch of banks, tons of banks. But if I walked into the bank there and said, "Wait a minute, before you open your mouth, I've worked with so many banks. I know more about your bank than you know about your bank, and I'll prove it to you." The good news is I'd be right. Bad news is, who would want to buy anything from me? The pompous bald guy, get out of here.
Exactly.
So you're right. We do. And, in fairness, there are little niches and brandings, and we learn a little bit. But the dirty little secret is we know a lot more about, and should know a lot more about that client than they might think. It's their story to tell. And the more disciplined we are in letting them tell that story, which does have some twists and turns we need to learn, but letting them do that, that's where trust is born. Without trust, where else are we going?
Right, exactly. And there are things that come up that I wouldn't have known without asking.
Right.
But sometimes I do feel like I could, bring the questions down to like 3 or 4 questions and get everything I would need, as opposed to spin selling, because spin selling was written in whatever the 60s or 70s before the internet was a thing, and before people had much information at all. So it made sense that you would have to have this like exhaustive interview process. So anyway, it seems like there's a lot that when you specialize and when you focus on a particular area, you can come in armed with.
Yeah, well, once again, as a D squared certified spin instructor, I must remind you that and that was the jumping board. So Neil's doing fine without my help. But we expand and contract based on product, based on personality, et cetera. So if I'm dealing with a dominant client, it's something, and I were spinning them, I'd still probably do most of my homework before I walked in there.
Right.
It's I don't have to play the game. The more that client talks, the more that client's going to like me. I need to move. So it does depend on the personality and product. In all fairness, for Neil's sake.
Right. And I didn't mean to make this an ad for spin selling, but it's hard to avoid that book. So, but to bring this to your stuff, and why people don't believe you, you argue that it's not the words, it's the tune. It's how people say things that matter. So to make this, hopefully tangible or practical, what are some of those examples that you run into of people presenting things or saying things the wrong way when you're working with clients?
I think it comes that, well, it's almost like music. Some of us just do it, Dan. We do it naturally, just like holding a note. You play a note and we can hit that note. And other people, we refer to them musically as tone deaf. You go bing and they go, they just can't get the note. All right, well, don't be a singer. But I am of the belief, as a trainer and as a, somebody, a consultant, that I can teach anybody to sell. But some people come in with a bit of a head start. And to answer your question, I think it usually falls into the music part, falls into three things. It's pitch, it's pace, and it's pause. I call it the three Ps, meaning I can naturally sort of hear that pitch. When I get excited, I go up, and sometimes I'll bring it down because and that actually holds your interest. Some people can't hear that; it kind of goes in a little mono. But we can actually teach them to pitch and do exercises where we actually stretch their range a little bit. Pace is the same thing. I don't want to just. I actually moonlight for 11 years now. As a live auctioneer, I am licensed in 16 states, only for charities. And I do it as a way of giving back. But boy, will you catch me in an auction, and particularly when I get into my chant, I am moving, okay? And the audience loves it, but I don't chant all the time, okay? As I'm selling the item, I slow down. We have to learn that changing that pace also makes us more authentic, more believable. That we change pace when we're having a beer, for goodness sakes, with a buddy. Why aren't we doing it with a client? And then there's the pause, which I think is the most overrated piece, and not overrated. It's underrated. It is, as I'm doing right now. I think it's valuable to pause, not necessarily where I put it, but if you ask me a question that's deep, even if I have the answer, why would I just rattle off an answer? Again, here's that part where we've got to play that role of let it land. Pause, take it in, particularly if I'm asking you a deeper question. I'm asking you, Dan, what's the impact of this podcast if we can't do such and such? And you answer it. Why would I want to rattle in another question? Why don't I pause more? What am I afraid of? I'm going to be more credible. So it's a book, and I don't want to go through the whole book, but to answer your question and pinpoint, I think it comes down to those three things. And if we can't hear the music, if we can teach it, and there are techniques for that, I think that helps. And I hope that helped answer your question.
Trying to pause. It's hard.
Yeah, I got to tell you, here's the funny part. For people, I saw your fingers moving. So on a phone call, it's really hard to pause.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Fortunately, face-to-face or with, a virtual, I can see that the person, and by the way, I usually grab my chin or, I have my pause move. When I'm,
it can be painful. Yeah. On sales calls, especially when you're waiting for an answer, I'll try to think of something else. Like I'll think of, baseball or something.
Yeah.
Just little devices like that. Yeah.
In training, by the way, we pause when we're doing a workshop or something. When we ask a question, does anybody have any questions? Good. Let's move on. That's not that. What happened to the pause? So the only way, because our mind moves very quickly, particularly in a sale or whatever, 3 seconds feels like 20 seconds. So it's funny, people might not be able to see it. You just did was you actually started moving and counting with your fingers. In fact, I teach professional speakers and trainers, put your arm behind your back when you're in front of an audience and count to, get ready for this, 8 when you've asked a question, because it'll really be 6.
That's an eternity. Yeah.
It's an eternity. And my running bet is count how many times at about 4 or 5 you get a question. Because a lot of times people are actually processing what you said, and they're, okay, well, wait a minute, it takes them a minute. Then the hand goes up, or then the question. We blow through that stop sign, we miss it. And boy, do I want questions from in a sale or from an audience.
Yeah, and for me, the other thing, which I started doing a long time ago, is standing up. Standing right now, standing now for this interview. I find I just speak better, think better, and it's healthier. It's just a good excuse to not be sitting all day. So it's something.
Can we talk about that for 10 seconds?
Please.
I actually, put on these programs of how to communicate virtually better. And you caught me sitting, actually. I'm sitting there going, why am I sitting?
Didn't mean to shame you. Yeah, it's okay.
Because when I'm on the other side of it, when I'm interviewing somebody, I'm up. When I'm doing a program, I'm up, and when I'm selling them up. So I actually do recommend you don't have to replace all your furniture, but Veridesk, there is probably the bigger player, but Winston, there's some really good pieces that will fit on your desk that will allow that monitor and everything to go up and down with you. And you're right. Not only will you get some good exercise, but tell me you're not going to have just a little bit more bounce and energy in that voice and activity if you're standing. So big believer in standing. I'm ashamed I'm sitting. How dare me?
Yeah. And so to follow up on all this stuff,
Yeah.
and then this might be a tough question, but how much of this stuff is a pre-feast setup meal versus buffet, right? How much of this stuff is stylistic versus stuff that you just need to do between pitch pause, pace pause, all these different things. I know there's people listening right now that are thinking, okay, this is great, but I'm kind of introverted. I don't know if I can get into a style like this. Is there something that I can do differently, or is this something I need to learn and adapt?
Okay. All right. Take a seat, Dan. I got this one. No, not really. Okay. Yeah. And for anybody listening, I want you to listen really carefully to the answer to this question because it's really important. I got to meet the greatest salesperson who ever lived. That's not why you're sitting right now. But I will tell you that the greatest salesperson who ever lived, in my mind, was the great Ben Feldman. I doubt anyone's ever heard of him. He did write a couple books, not in print. They didn't sell very well. He was deathly afraid to speak in front of an audience. I call him the best ever because of his numbers. I don't care how many books you wrote. I don't care how many seminars you delivered. I want to know what you sold. If you're walking up to me and tell me you're the best, okay. And when Ben Feldman sold, and he was a New York Life agent, he sold, let's put it this way, the number 2 person in the entire insurance industry back, and I'm in the early 80s now, but hang on with me. The number 2 person in a pool of 250,000 salespeople sold roughly 50 million of insurance. Number 3 was 49 million, 48 million. Ben Feldman that year sold 151 million. And we're in a pool of 250,000. He did it years before, years after, 1.6 billion in his lifetime, 16-year string of $1 million a month in sales. It staggers the mind. So we obviously know what he looks like. He's kind of got, an Alec Baldwin, Rob Jolles, monster of a man. When I met him, and he's no longer with us, but he stood about 5'3". He was large. We'll leave it at that. He had hair like Larry on the Three Stooges. Spoke with a distinct pronounced lisp like this, and sold in the sprawling metropolis of East Liverpool, Ohio. I'll tell you, as a 21-year-old, because I was pretty hot as a New York Life agent, they nicknamed me the Rocket, and they set up this lunch. The Rocket is going to meet Ben, and I walked in there, all big-headed, and there he was, but within 20 seconds after being stunned, I sat down. I went, "Oh my goodness! There's technique and there's process, and they're different. And where people, to answer your question, where people get tangled up, is they keep meshing the two together. Okay, listen, Ben Feldman didn't possess one style, classic style piece that you would associate with a great salesperson, and yet he outsold the world. Doesn't that prove the point that when we're working with anyone, Dan, Rob, doesn't matter. We're not asking you to copy our style. If you're introverted, stay introverted. Ben Feldman was clearly an introverted person and lethal, okay? Now, he had some really solid techniques. We talk about asking open questions or problem-based questions or certain trial closes to test decision points. That's not style. That's technique. You can stylize how you want to say it. And so if this is where we lose people. I know I'm going a little long on this answer, but I got it. Thanks. I got to get this off my chest. Yeah, I got it. I claim that in a sense we teach salespeople to fail because not only do we douse them in product information and call them sales trained. Okay, so now we have somebody who won't shut up and listen, right? We then mentor them with Larry, who's been with us for 29 years. And Larry's like, listen, my guy was a guy named Bill Creekmore. They called him Creek. And I remember spent a week with him, and he didn't even like me walking with him. And I would say things like, "Mr. Creekmore, when do you know when it's time to close?" And he'd say, "Boy, you'll see in their eyes." And I was like, "Okay," and I'm writing this down. So I've got too much product information. I'm copying somebody else's style, and it's, what do you know? I'm struggling. So clearly, to answer your question, I believe anyone can sell as long as you commit to the style that you have naturally. And I promise you, if you put in repeatable, predictable techniques and tactics that make sense, and let's get off this book a month club too. I don't need 7 golf trainers. If you like Rackham, stay with Rackham. If you like Tracy, stay with Tracy. If you like Jolles, stay with Jolles. I don't care, but don't keep switching. Because what's your golf swing going to look like in 12 months with 12 different golf instructors, all certified,
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And we're sort of at this weird intersection where we're doing, part sales, part marketing, I guess. And one thing that we ask our clients to do is, when we write copy for you, read it out loud. Make sure that you would actually say this if we're doing the outreach as you. So that makes perfect sense to me. So to bring this forward, right? So as we're getting kind of towards the end of the time, as a thought exercise, so you have somebody like Ben Feldman or the other people that you mentioned that you respect, and they were selling in the 80s. Now we're in this weird juncture of history in 2020 where sales is done almost exclusively through Zoom, like we're doing right now. How would those guys have adjusted their style for this situation?
Well, that's a good question. I know how I'm adjusting my style. So how about, look, these guys they're on the Mount Rushmore. Some of the names I'm mentioning, I don't know if they're adjusting anything. I think it was an honor to buy from them. But how about the average guy? Okay, the average woman. I think the adjustment of style it's a couple of things. First of all, virtually, I find that we have to shorten up our stories a bit. You notice that almost apologetically, I was like, "I'm sorry, I'm going a little longer this one." Okay, just give me 10 more seconds. I have this, I call it a communication shot clock. We got one in basketball. It's 24 seconds. We got a play clock in football. I think it's 35. Baseball better get their act together and get a pitch clock, or that sport's going to die on the vine. So we understand that people are moving quicker. Everything is quicker. Information's quicker. I think one of the adjustments that needs to be made right now, not necessarily face-to-face, but certainly virtually, is we got to speed things up a little bit. My communication shot clock is typically 45 seconds. And what this audience might not know is when I spoke to you, Dan, before we started, one of the only questions I had was, think about it, time. What do you like on answers? Because I'm obsessed with not going on too long. I think we have to shorten them up. I would say 45 seconds to about 1:15. Remember, you have an audience that you can't see their hands, but they're opening up mail programs. They're texting. They're doing all kinds of kooky things while you think they're focused on you. Okay.
Sure. And I think that you're right, and I appreciate your conscientiousness. At the same time, I disagree a little bit because as we are having this interview, some news came out yesterday, and a one Mr. Joe Rogan just got paid $100 million by Spotify to exclusively host his podcast over there. He's doing 3-hour-long podcasts with people. There's no time limits at all, and that's
but how long, Dan? And listen, write me a check for $100 million, and whatever you say is the answer is true. Yeah. But remember, I don't care if we go on. I've been still putting on 3-hour webinars. Okay.
Sure.
Now I do certain things, but I'm referring to actually telling stories, answering questions. In other words, the exchange of information during those 3 hours. I actually don't listen to Joe Rogan. I certainly know who he is. But I'm wondering how long he lets his guests go on for with responses to questions.
Sure.
And I don't know the answer, But let me give you part B. Part A is if you're really good at it, go, I guess. But part B is I like to do something I call landing a story. I don't necessarily do it live, but a lot of times when I'm virtual, I will tell people, they'll ask me about Ben Feldman, whatever. I'll bring up Ben Feldman. But I almost always will finish it with, and I tell you this story because. And I do that because I don't know where this audience is, particularly in a webinar situation where might have 80 people on this call. I don't know who's vacuuming, who's boiling eggs. I don't know what's going on the other side. Okay, they're all muted. But a lot of times what I'm doing when I say, and I mention this because, or the reason why this is important, is I'm trying to verbally pull them back into the conversation in case I've lost them. Live, I can see who's looking down on the lap, texting. I can't see this audience. I can't see the client. I can't see the audience. So I like to land them and shorten them a little bit. But I'll go as long as I never go less than an hour.
Right.
With a
right.
client.
Well, I think you're probably channeling something that's very old and very primordial in a way, right? Like a lot of people are looking at podcasts like it's the shiny object, and it's really not. We're sort of getting back to the way that humans transacted information for millennia. And we just haven't been able to do it. We had this weird interlude from the printing press until a few years ago, where that was the way information was spread, because you couldn't spread audio. You couldn't spread recorded audio very easily. So I think when you say, "Let me tell you a story," there's something that's in the human hardware that once makes people perk up and listen, because we did that over campfires forever.
Yeah, good point.
Could be. Who knows? Yeah. So I guess kind of to wrap things up, I'd love to hear what you're working on now, and how all this is affecting your business and what you're doing.
One of the things I'm working on is I jumped in like on May 6th of interviewing anybody I get my hands on, and studying really the conversion of live to virtual. I've spent most of my career trying to figure out how to generate income as a professional speaker and not be away from my family and friends. So there's a lot of challenging and difficult situations out there. But, with loss comes gain sometimes. I'm actually enjoying the world of virtual delivery. But like you, I respect the fact that you can podcast, or you can stand up and fight, which is exactly what you're doing. That's what I want presenters to do. So what I'm doing is I've put together some programs on selling virtually, speaking virtually, communicating virtually, then packaging them. And I've been actually delivering more programs than I normally deliver when there isn't a pandemic. But I'm enjoying it, and I want to get. I'm quirky this way. I don't want to be good. I want to be the best. And so I am looking for any ideas and thoughts, et cetera. So, standing up, things like that, those are smart ideas. And it's right now, it's more of my passion to teach people that, and to teach myself that it is the Wild West of delivery right now out there. Yeah. And, but I'm working on that. I'm kicking around a book idea, but this last one just came out, and I'm still promoting it a little bit. The Why People Don't Believe You, which, by the way, I have to tell you, it's the most clunky title because
I think it sticks.
It stinks, but it's hard to recommend it, because if I spoke to you and I said, "Hey, Dan, one last thing, I got the greatest book for you. This is it's perfect. It's just what you need." And I go, "It's called Why People Don't Believe You. Hey, thanks for having me on your show." It kind of slaps people when you say it. So I almost have to apologize when I say, "Well, not for you, of course, but I think you'll enjoy it."
Well, I'm sure it's true, otherwise I would close every single deal, right?
Well, so how about sometimes, sometimes. But anyway, so I really think this virtual delivery isn't going anywhere. We're going to get out. We're going to, we will be back in restaurants and bars again, and we'll be singing Happy Days or here again. I don't know when, but it's coming. But I don't want to lose what we just found, which is this is better than a phone call. And if I don't want to send an email to my client and sell, oh my goodness, talk about lazy. A phone is better, but boy, this is, other than right in front of you, this really is good. Let's learn to do it really well.
Yeah, and we'll see where it goes. I think there's going to be some weird and crazy innovation around it.
Yeah,
in the coming months. So that makes sense. Rob, thank you so much. How can people get in touch with you?
Oh, easy. JOLLES.com. I actually started my own humble little podcast called Pocket Size Pep Talks. But I write something called a blarticle. Dan, it's not a blog. It's not an article. It's a blarticle. And I trademarked that one, by the way. And not because I hereby give the world permission to use it. I just didn't want to build something and then be sued by somebody else. That looks like a good idea.
Yeah.
But I've been writing them for 11 years. Number 310 will be coming out tomorrow. Every other Friday I release, and they're short, and they got the personal touch of a blog, but I think I'm a sales guy. So what's in it for me? What's in it for the audience? It's not a blog article legally if there isn't something in it for the reader. So you'll find some stuff there anyway. That's something I enjoy doing.
Awesome. Appreciate that. We'll get that linked up. Rob, thank you so much.
Pleasure.